World War II is often painted as a historical event of heroes and villains, white against black. However, the reality is much more complex and conflictive. Both the Axis and Allied forces committed countless atrocities that are still difficult to recount today. Massacres, rapes, and looting were just some of the activities carried out by troops on both sides, breaking the unspoken rules of fair confrontation. In today's video, we are going to review some of the most aberrant and controversial events of the most important contest of the 20th century. Prepare for a journey to the darkest part of the human being, to that corner where, in the midst of the delirium of war, everything is allowed and there is no moral limit. We warn you that this may be an episode not suitable for a sensitive audience. Without further ado, welcome once again to Military History. The landing in Normandy and the subsequent liberation of French territory by the Allied troops stands out as one of the most impressive feats of the Second World War. Although the American military was enthusiastically welcomed by locals grateful to be freed from German occupation, unfortunately, some American soldiers took advantage of this warm welcome in unacceptable ways. Amid the victory celebration, alarming reports emerged of inappropriate behavior by American troops. There were cases of gang rapes of French women and acts of sexual abuse in public places, even in front of children and relatives of the victims. These horrendous crimes were committed by some American fighters who seemed convinced that French women were prone to becoming involved with supposed savior heroes. However, they became a stain on the record of its armed forces. Some incidents were particularly violent, as described by the testimony of one of the premises in which soldiers, under the influence of alcohol, broke into a house at dusk and tried to kidnap two women, a mother and daughter. Although they managed to escape, the recruits persisted in their search through the area until finally finding them in a neighbor's closet shortly before midnight. The victims were brutally attacked through physical torture and sexual access without consent, leaving an indelible scar on their lives. It is crucial to note that these condemnable actions did not represent the entire Allied forces, nor do they reflect the original intention of liberating the French population. However, some soldiers, misinterpreting the situation, mistakenly believed that French women deserved to be subjected to this behavior, as if it were some kind of macabre reward for having expelled the Germans. They believed themselves to be masters and owners of the French women. This distorted perspective of the female Gallic population was fueled by stereotypes previously generated among World War I veterans and propagated by the military magazine Stars and Stripes. These official serials presented French women as women of an eroticized country, a fictional vision that stirred a tsunami of male lust. This false perception, which portrayed France as a huge brothel inhabited by 40 million hedonists, not only dishonored the women of that country, but was also perceived by the local population as a second assault on their sovereignty and dignity. However, this explanation, obviously insufficient, would leave out other systematic carnal abuses committed by Franklin D. Roosevelt's forces, such as those exercised on German women after the liberation of Berlin from the Nazi yoke. Let's listen to the shocking testimony of a survivor.
By then I was in my 9 months pregnancy, also close to having my child, and they kicked with the boot, Frau komm. That's the only German word maybe they knew, Frau komm. And then the person had to get up, the woman, and they didn't take her outside the basement. They put her against the wall, and they stood in line with their machine gun pointing at us and raped the woman.
Despite their reprehensible actions, the Americans were not the only ones who perpetrated sexual atrocities on populations they defeated. Americanate is the term that evokes the tragic mass rapes and massacres that occurred after the Battle of Monte Cassino, perpetrated by Allied troops. The French Expeditionary Corps on the Italian front was made up of 130,000 men from Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Senegal, coming from the French colonies in North Africa. Among them were the Humiers, a group of wild African fundamentalists. We are talking about a total of 7,833 soldiers, who wore the distinctive Arab burnous, a green wool tunic with multicolored bands and rope sandals. In addition, they carried their characteristic curved dagger, called kumia, used to cut off the ears and noses of dead enemies to create macabre necklaces. Its commander was the ambitious General Alphonse Juin, originally from Algeria, who, after having collaborated with the Nazis, readily joined the French forces. On May 14, 1944, Allied troops advanced, breaking through the German defenses, reaching an Italian town. Finally, the town would be captured on May 18th, marking the end of the conflict that bore the name of the place, the Battle of Monte Cassino. The following night, a division of thousands of Gumiers, after General Juin's harangue, left their camp with sinister intentions. They moved along the mountain slopes surrounding cities and towns in the Chiocheria region and unleashed hell on dozens of communities. Moroccan soldiers selected the most beautiful women in each village to subject them to gang rape. Endless lines of soldiers waited their turn, while others brutally restrained the victims. According to chilling testimonies and archives of the time, sometimes those chosen were barely adolescent girls. In a small isolated Italian village, Moroccans raped 30 women and 2 men. In Valamayo, 2 sisters aged 15 and 17 were forced to sexually satisfy a platoon of 200 Gumiers, an act of unprecedented cruelty and inhumanity. After endless hours of abuse, one of the young women died, while the other suffered an incurable psychotic break, spending the last 53 years of her life in an asylum. Within the framework of the Moroccanate, an incomprehensible case was the attack by 300 Franco-Moroccan Allied soldiers on a 60-year-old man, whom they gang-raped as a brutal lesson in his supposed insolence. Later, they began routinely raping men in Italian towns. In addition to these atrocities, soldiers looted homes and stole valuables. This dark chapter of history illustrates the complexity and hidden tragedies behind the actions of the Allied troops during World War II. However, Axis soldiers could be as cruel and abusive as the sinister troops just described. The civilian population, particularly women, elderly women and girls, suffered the most in what is remembered as the Nanjing Massacre. It is estimated that around 80,000 women were abused by the Japanese army and then murdered in the most brutal ways. More than a warlike occupation, it seemed that the imperial troops were carrying out a purge plan. The soldiers carried out an exhaustive door-to-door search to find each and every member of the female population. Then, they were taken captive and abused. The prisoners, regardless of their age or whether they were pregnant, were killed immediately after being raped. The means chosen were completely inhumane. They ranged from mutilation, in which their breasts were cut off and they were bled, to being stabbed with bayonets in their private parts. According to investigations after the fact, there were at least 1,000 cases of rape per night and as many during the day, during the duration of the Japanese army's invasion. Records from some missionaries of the time left such chilling testimonies that they are difficult to reproduce today. We share one with you, warning that it is truly heartbreaking. This is a statement corresponding to Minnie Vautrin and was taken from her personal diary on December 16, 1937. There is probably no crime that has not been committed in this city today. 30 girls were taken from the language school and their homes yesterday afternoon, some of whom were as young as 12 and raped by soldiers. Also tonight, we heard a truck full of prisoners pass by the door of the newspaper, in which there were at least 8 or 10 girls screaming for help from the bed of the vehicle. Although this writing is horrifying, Hearing the torments experienced in first person from a survivor is truly painful.
So one soldier stabbed me here before doing this. This other one here. He struck me here, like this. There, see? Then he took me here and stuck my head in a drum filled with water. I couldn't breathe anymore. Then he bound my hands behind me and tied me to a jackfruit tree. And then he raped me.
The Imperial troops moved in small numbers to act freely and prowled through the devastated villages, raping women and girls and killing anyone who tried to resist. In some cases, these carnal attacks were filmed and always ended with the victim being murdered. The most ruthless and savage thing about the whole situation was that there was no mercy for the outraged women. The victims ranged from girls under 8 years old to elderly women over 70 who were raped in the most brutal way possible. Specialized historians consider that the attack on Nanking carried out one of the largest collective and systematic violations in the history of humanity. In the fall of 1941, as Third Reich troops advanced into the heart of the Soviet Union, Kiev fell to German hands on September 19th. Just 10 days later, Einsatzgruppen C, death squad supported by the SS and local collaborators, carried out the brutal Babi Yar Ravine massacre on the outskirts of the city. This sickening episode, the first mass shooting of the Holocaust, would become the Third Reich's greatest crime up to that point, marking a grim milestone in World War II. The Babi Yar massacre did not seek to displace or politically discriminate against the Jewish population of Kiev, as had been done in occupied areas since 1939. On the contrary, it represented a qualitative leap in the Holocaust by aiming at the total extermination of the Jew community of the city. The atrocity, designed to fulfill its objective of annihilation within a chilling period of 48 hours, marked the beginning of a dark chapter in history. From the first moment of the German occupation of Kiev, Jews were targets of aggression and humiliation by Ukrainian nationalists. However, tragedy struck during the first week of the occupation, when a series of explosions destroyed the German headquarters, providing the Nazis with the necessary excuse to carry out their genocidal plan. Babi Yar, known as Grandmother's Ravine, was the location chosen by the Allgemeine SS for this mass massacre. Its remote location, next to a psychiatric hospital and a prison, offered the perfect setting to hide the horrors that were committed under a cloak of total impunity. The Jews were forced to form groups and march towards the ravine, guarded by Ukrainian auxiliaries. The journey, marked by insults and beatings, culminated in the tragic vision of the abyss, full of the lifeless bodies of his compatriots and family members. Stripped naked and stripped of all humanity, the unfortunate people were shot to death in groups of 10, and those who were wounded were finished off or buried between layers of corpses. In a horrifying span of 2 days, on September 29th and 30, 1941, Nazi forces and local collaborators recorded the execution of 33,371 Jews at Babi Yar, marking the beginning of the tragic path toward Hitler's final solution. Neither women, children, nor elderly found salvation in this massacre. This is illustrated by the following testimony.
И когда я подошел к брустверу и увидел внизу 45 метров, 45 или 50 метров, я не мог измерить, но такая была глубина. Я увидал лежащую женщину, мертвую еврейку. На ней лежал маленький ребеночек, ну, может быть, ему было год или 2, и он мамин сосал бюст, но грудь, да. Но он жил, а мама была убита.
The sinister ravine continued to witness mass murder for 2 more years, where tens of thousands of victims, both Jews and non-Jews, lost their lives. The Nazis eliminated evidence, exhumed bodies, and cremated them to hide the crimes. The exact number of victims is currently unknown, but some experts estimate it at a minimum of 100,000. Even so, other scholars of the subject suggest that the figure could be double. In this way, Babi Yar became a grim symbol of the brutality of the Holocaust, where humanity was thrown into the deepest pit in history. However, it was neither the first nor the last massacre of World War II. The small village of Lidice, located in Czechoslovakia, witnessed one of the most heinous acts perpetrated by Nazi forces. The town, nestled in the tranquility of its rural surroundings, was violated on June 10, 1942. That day marked the beginning of a nightmare that would have no end for its inhabitants. In retaliation for the murder of Reinhard Heydrich, a Nazi leader known as the Butcher of Prague, German forces decided to carry out ruthless revenge. Lidice, with no connection to the attack, became a target of the fury of the Third Reich. In an act of unprecedented brutality, German troops surrounded the village and proceeded to loot, burn, and raze everything in their path. The men were murdered, the women raped and deported to extermination sites, and the children separated from their families to face uncertain fates. Some were adopted, others sold, and others ended up in concentration camps. The once bustling streets were plunged into the silence of the tragedy, while the smoking rubble was silent, witness to the barbarism ordered by the Führer. Lidice's fate was marked by a draconian order: erase her from the map. Each of the buildings and fields were reduced to ashes, causing the name of Lidice to disappear from Czechoslovak geography. This massacre was a symbol of Hitler's Germany's ruthless policy of retaliation. Whoever defied the Reich paid the consequences. The village, although it was physically erased from the map, lives eternally in the European consciousness as a reminder of the bloodthirsty actions of Nazism. Another atrocious event that occurred during the Second War was the Biscari Massacre. Located in Sicily, Italy, this tragedy occurred in July 1943 during the Island Campaign by the Allied forces. At the height of the conflict, the small town became an involuntary witness to a series of atrocities that would be written in blood in the history books. After the Allied invasion of Sicily, the region was under the control of American forces. However, what should have been a step towards liberation turned into a nightmare for the Italian and German prisoners of war who fell into American hands. Conditions in the Biscari prisoner of war camp were inhumane. Overcrowding, lack of basic supplies, and built-up tension between prisoners and guards created an explosive breeding ground. Fatigue and exhaustion intertwined with the stress of war, and the result was a series of events that led to the Biscari Massacre. On July 14, 1943, the conflict reached a critical point. American soldiers then opened fire on unarmed prisoners, resulting in an act of indiscriminate violence that left a significant number of dead and wounded. Subsequent reports suggest that the reasons behind this tragic event are complex and multifaceted. According to scholars of the matter, the incident occurred due to factors ranging from the virulence that was experienced daily in the field to the inexperience and fear of some Allied soldiers. The Biscari Massacre should not only be remembered as a historical event, but also as a warning about the extremes to which humanity can go when immersed in the chaos of war, as is the case that we are going to tell below. The 1940 Katyn massacre took place in the Katyn forests near the Russian city of Smolensk, where thousands of Polish officers and leaders were summarily executed. After the Soviet Union invaded Poland in 1939, many officers and prominent figures from the neighboring country were captured by Red Army forces. In an act of betrayal that left an indelible scar on European history, Stalin and his regime made the decision to annihilate these Polish figures who, in theory, were going to be allies in the fight against Nazi Germany. A machinery of death was set in motion in a calculated manner in Katyn. Nearly 22,000 prisoners from invaded Poland, including soldiers, intellectuals, and political leaders, were executed by shooting them in the back of the head, a death as impersonal as it is operational. The atrocity was carried out with precision and brutality, with the aim of eliminating any possibility of Polish resistance and destabilizing any future leadership. The horror that occurred in the Russian forests came to light in 1943, when German forces, advancing east, discovered mass graves in which the remains of those murdered lay. The news shocked the world and became a symbol of the complex web of alliances and betrayals that wove the fabric of World War II. All the events narrated in today's episode represent the darkest and most sinister side in the history of World War II. It is essential to reflect on the review of transcendental events and understand that atrocities do not respond only to one side or one country, but are part of human nature. Therefore, it is essential to remember these events to try to eradicate the behaviors that give way to the most miserable and mean side of the human being. This is how we are ending today's atrocious video. We look forward to your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to be aware of more military events. We thank you for reaching the end, and we look forward to seeing you in the next installments of Military History.